All right, have you booked your summer travel for 2026 yet? Well, you might actually want to hold on to that boarding pass for a second. Why? Because your plans might literally get derailed by a massive political fight that's completely paralyzing Washington right now. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a legislative and fiscal crisis that has absolutely zero precedent in American history. We are talking about a targeted funding shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security that is, quite frankly, threatening to break the system from the inside out. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the record-breaking shutdown itself, the OBB funding paradox, the real-world security impacts we're seeing, the security flashpoint at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, explain the congressional gridlock, and finally, look at the looming May paycheck cliff. Let's get right into it. Part 1. A record-breaking shutdown. Right now, we are witnessing a targeted lapse in appropriations that has pushed the Department of Homeland Security into completely uncharted territory. Literally uncharted. As of late April 2026, the DHS has been operating under a partial funding lapse for over 72 days. This isn't just a frustrating delay, It has blown past all previous agency-specific records since the impasse officially kicked off on February 14th. Now, check out the stark contrast here. If we compare the current crisis to the 43-day shutdown back in 2025, or the broader 35-day shutdown from 2018 to 2019, this 2026 duration just completely dwarfs them both. But here's the really interesting part, the cause. This isn't your typical broad fight over the entire federal budget. No, this is highly targeted. It's basically a fundamental collision between the executive branch's aggressive enforcement agenda and a congressional minority's demands for civil liberty oversight, which, if you remember, were sparked by those protest deaths in early 2026. So, this entire gridlock, it's centered completely around funding and reforms for ICE and Customs and Border Protection. Which brings us to Part 2, the OBBBA funding paradox. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, if the department has been unfunded for over 2 months, how on earth are the airports still running? Well, enter the OBBA, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This was a massive spending law passed back in July 2025 that gave the DHS $191 billion in multi-year funding. But the absolutely crucial part for our situation right now is Section 9007. This section set up a $10 billion unrestricted slush fund. So, back in March, the president issued an executive memo to tap into this exact fund just to temporarily pay essential non-enforcement workers, like TSA agents, for example, who otherwise would have gotten absolutely nothing. So because of this, we now have this bizarre reality and a deeply fractured department. On one hand, you've got enforcement agencies like ICE and CBP sitting on nearly $140 billion in appropriations that don't even expire until 2029. They're fully operational. But on the other hand, the non-enforcement agencies have been surviving entirely on that $10 billion slush fund. And here's the catch. When you have a $1.6 billion bi-weekly payroll, a $10 billion fund drains incredibly fast. Right now, it is practically empty. Part 3. Real-world security impacts. As that slush fund dries up, we really have to look at the visceral human toll of this stalemate, because the impacts go way, way beyond the halls of Washington. The absolute most crucial point here is this staggering number, 1,110. That is the number of transportation security officers, TSOs, who've actually resigned in just 10 weeks since the shutdown started. That's a 25% jump compared to the same time in 2024. These are frontline workers dealing with extreme financial strain, delayed paychecks, and the very real threat of eviction. And since it takes months to recruit and train a new officer, these massive staffing gaps, they're locked in for the foreseeable future. And the TSA is just the most visible casualty here. Let's run through some of the more silent impacts. The U.S. Coast Guard is currently staring down over 5,000 unpaid utility bills, with providers actually threatening to cut off water and electricity to their stations. Crazy, right? Their Arctic security cutters and intelligence networks totally stalled. Then you have CISA, our frontline agency for protecting critical infrastructure from foreign cyber attacks. They've been hit with a hiring freeze. And FEMA's disaster preparedness is facing critical delays right ahead of the 2026 hurricane season. This is a big deal because it actively degrades our national security and our emergency response capabilities every single day. Moving on to Part 4, the WHCD security flashpoint. Just as the systemic strain was hitting a peak, a violent event in late April injected a dangerous, whole new level of urgency into the funding stalemate. Let's look at the timeline. On Saturday, April 25th, a 31-year-old suspect named Cole Allen breached security at the Washington Hilton during the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, a pistol, and carrying a manifesto targeting administration officials, he opened fire. A Secret Service agent was hit in the chest, but miraculously, he was saved by his bulletproof vest. In the immediate aftermath of this, both political parties immediately seized on the glaring hotel security lapses to argue their respective cases for DHS funding. The executive branch was super quick to highlight the heroism of the agents who stepped in. As President Trump noted, this is a group that is not being paid, using the incident to demand an immediate end to the shutdown. But this event actually added a really complicated new layer to the negotiations. House conservatives, led by Representative Chip Roy, started arguing that commercial hotels are just inherently unsafe, and they began demanding a brand new appropriation to build a secure ballroom directly on White House grounds.
So, where does that leave us? Part 5. Congressional Gridlock Explained.
How exactly is Congress handling all this? Well, the debate over how to solve this crisis has completely fractured into two very different realities. Track one is happening in the Senate, where they've actually passed a bipartisan bill unanimously twice to immediately fund all those struggling non-enforcement agencies we just talked about. But track two is over in the House, where leadership is pushing a budget reconciliation process. This is basically a technical maneuver designed to bypass the Senate's 60-vote filibuster and lock in $70 billion specifically for ICE and CBP. House Speaker Mike Johnson refuses to vote on track one, fearing that if he funds popular agencies like the Coast Guard and TSA, he's going to lose all his leverage over Democrats on immigration policy.
And honestly, making matters so much worse is the sheer dysfunction of the process itself. Recently, House leadership faced what aides literally called a nightmare week of internal revolts. Get this. Farm state Republicans held up the entire DHS budget blueprint because they were mad over ethanol provisions and delays to the Farm Bill. Meanwhile, hardliners are demanding the inclusion of the SAVE Act and major deficit reduction measures. It is textbook sausage-making. And if House leadership caters to these demands, it threatens to completely derail any chance of a compromise with the Senate.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, the May paycheck cliff. All of this builds to an incredibly urgent ticking clock and a very real immediate danger staring down the country right now. By early May, that $10 billion OBBA/slush fund, it's completely exhausted. That brings us to May 22nd, what we're calling the paycheck cliff. If nothing changes, 280,000 DHS personnel are going to miss their full compensation. Congress absolutely has to act by that date, whether it's a bipartisan retreat by the House, a reconciliation Hail Mary, or a short-term continuing resolution. And why is the timeline so strict? Because in June 2026, millions of travelers are arriving for the FIFA World Cup. If this isn't solved by then, the trillion-dollar aviation industry and this massive global event are facing absolutely catastrophic disruptions. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to consider. If basic security functions like simply paying the Coast Guard and the TSA hinge entirely on political leverage, what does this mean for the future of American governance and our safety on the global stage? The window for an orderly resolution to this crisis is rapidly closing, and the stakes seriously could not be higher. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and we will definitely be watching very closely to see how Washington navigates this unprecedented fiscal brinkmanship.